This is Fire and Fate by Serena Valentino, Chapter 13. A Change of Fate. The Book of Fairy Tales had stopped playing, but as Hades said, his story was not over. It was still being written. Dark clouds were gathering over the dead woods now, illuminated by flashing bolts of red lightning that penetrated the stone walls of the mansion, causing them to crack and crumble. The sky was red with blood, and these stone angels in the dead woods were weeping, just as the Fates had warned. The room was shaking, causing everything on the table to rattle, the dishes clattering and cups falling over. Everyone looked around, wondering what was happening, and then they saw it. The stone dragon's head in the fireplace was moving. It had come to life, twisting its head right to left, cracking the stone. The fireplace collapsed, freeing the dragon from its imprisonment. Everyone scattered from the dining table right before the dragon slammed into it, and the table broke into piles of jagged stone. The dragon jumped onto the low wall, knocking over the candles and taking out one of the pillars as it spread its long wings and took off, soaring into the sky. The mansion was shaking so violently that pieces of stone were falling from the ceiling as the creatures that were carved into the stone building were coming to life one by one, smashing their ways out of the windows and taking to the sky to join the dragon. The party rushed to the window to see what was happening. The stone ravens, gargoyles, and harpies were in flight. Even the weeping angels were imbued with life and were now circling above the dead woods as the dead emerged from their graves, marching toward the mansion. Hades looked around, trying to find the source of the magic, the person or thing causing this. He made his mind still and felt for the vibrations of the entities responsible, but they were eluding him. They were hiding in the shadows like the insidious witches they were, and then he knew in that moment who it was, the Odd Sisters. "This is my fault," Circe cried. "I should have never tried to fuse my mothers into one person. We were happy in the place between, but I was selfish and I wanted my mother with me in the land of the living, here in the dead woods. I thought combining them would make that possible." "You did what was fated, Circe. You're not meant to be in the place between, just like I wasn't meant to stay in the many kingdoms," said Hades. "So you're meant to be Lord of the Underworld, forever doomed to be alone? For the record, I would happily help you destroy Zeus if you asked me. I almost destroyed your other brother for what he did to Ursula," said Circe, making Hades smile. He loved seeing flashes of Lucinda within her. "Don't take this the wrong way, but you really do have the best parts of your mothers," he said. "Neither of us can escape our fate, Circe." "She is nothing like us!" The Odd Sisters' voices penetrated the entire mansion, making it rumble more violently than before, causing more stones to crash down around them. Hades heard their screeches coming from the library, and the group ran to see what was happening. There they saw the Odd Sisters making their way through the portrait hanging over the fireplace, clawing their way out. They looked like giant insects, their bodies contorted and squeezing out from the tight space, skittering down the stone walls until finally they were standing before them. Lucinda looked as if she had been torn apart and haphazardly stitched back together again. Blood oozed from the great gashes in her face as she laughed uncontrollably. The faces of Ruby and Martha were also soaked in blood, their eyes peering at Hades and the younger witches, radiating pain, terror, and hatred. Even Hades was horrified, and he ruled the dead. He searched their faces, trying to find something of the witches he loved, but the witches he loved were no longer within them, and something truly horrible had taken their place. It broke his heart to see them this way. "Oh, Lucinda, my dearest witch, who did this to you? Why didn't you use your magic to heal your wounds?" he asked, touching the deep gashes in her face gently. "I wanted Circe to see what she did to me. I am in torment. You know Circe must die. You thought about doing it yourself years ago. It's the only way to end this, the only way to have us back." "Ah, my loves," he said, looking at the Odd Sisters. He knew he owed this to them. He knew he had to make it right. Circe would understand. Chapter 14. Happily Ever Afterlife. Hades was back home in the underworld after his ordeal in the dead woods, drinking pomegranate wine on the terrace and watching the ferryman usher in the dead. He had grown to love this view of the river Styx, and made it his nightly ritual to watch the dead as the dead first set foot on the shores of the underworld. But this evening he was awaiting the new arrivals with even more anticipation than usual. He watched as they stepped off the boat, each of them giving the ferryman a coin before disembarking and making their way to his fortress, where he had a lavish banquet waiting for them. Hades had spent many evenings this way, trying to content himself with the company of the dead, and this evening was no different. He saw his new guests coming, making their way up the winding path that led to his palace, and he got up and walked to the dining room so he could greet the dead before their feast, as was his custom. This evening there would be fewer guests in attendance than usual, but Hades didn't mind. He heard the sound of their clicking heels on the onyx floors and knew they were almost there. And then he saw them, his witches, his Lucinda, Ruby, and Martha, looking exactly as they had the first night he met them. Welcome back, witches, he said, smiling at them. Their sweet laughter rang throughout the halls of the underworld as they called his name and ran to greet him, hugging him over and over and covering his cheeks with their red lip paint. So I take it you given me for killing you? He asked, pouring them some wine and handing them their glasses. You made us whole again. You saved Circe and you saved us. Of course we forgive you. Thank the deities, he said, spying himself in his magic mirror. I look like Jack Burton, he said as he wiped the lip paint from his face. He knew the Odd Sisters had no idea who he was talking about, but it didn't matter. He was happy to be with his witches again, to be laughing with them and making jokes they didn't understand. And because I know you're going to ask, Circe is fine, and so are Primrose, Hazel, and Jacob. They're working to restore the Deadwoods, said Hades, fending off more kisses and hugs. What about the Wraith Queens? Do Circe, Primrose, and Hazel know how to protect themselves from them? Lucinda had only been herself again for a matter of hours, and she was already fretting over Circe. Hades was pleased. Oh, I banished those hags. I should have done it hundreds of years ago, but enough of that. I have a surprise for you. Well, 2 surprises, actually, Hades said, beaming with both of his hands up, his fingers wiggling excitedly. Is that our surprise? Pizzazz hands? Asked Martha, rolling her eyes. No, you dingbat, but they're great, right? He said, cracking himself up again. This surprise is even better than pizzazz hands, if you can believe it. Behold, he said, stretching out his arm like a carnival barker might when presenting a major attraction. Circe! The Odd Sisters screamed, running toward her. What are you doing here? And then they stopped, realizing who it was. This wasn't their daughter, it was their sister, the Circe who had been taken away from them so many years before. They just stood there, looking at her until they were overcome with joy, covering her in kisses and hugging her again and again. Isn't that anyone going to say hello to me? It was Flans. The Odd Sisters gasped, rushing over and fawning over her, giving her kisses and scrunches behind her ears. How did you get here, you wicked cat? Lucinda asked, picking her up. Flans has been with me for a while now, said Hades, scratching her under the chin. It's only fitting that the great Hecate take her place in the underworld where she belongs. Hades smiled at them, flashing his dagger teeth and brilliant yellow eyes. That was our secret, Hades, said Flans, eyeing him. Oh, come on, we're all family here, and it's not like they wouldn't guess once Circe eventually sees fit to change you back into your real form, he said cheekily. What's this? What's going on? Said the Odd Sisters as one. They had no idea what Hades was talking about. Everyone calm down. We can talk about it over dinner. And look, I had my minions put out my finest bone china, he said, cracking himself up and filling their skull chalices with more wine. Get it? Bone china? This time the Odd Sisters got the joke, and they all ended up on the floor laughing, dropping their chalices and spilling their wine. Let's make a toast, Hades said, handing them each a new chalice. To family. He held up his chalice with one hand while petting Flans with the other. To Circe, to Hecate, and to my little furies. May we all live deliciously. Hades was happy, happier than he had ever been, and he wondered if they deserved such a delicious ending, but he didn't care. He finally had laughter in the underworld again. His witches were home at last. Epilogue. Circe, Primrose, and Hazel stood in their courtyard, looking up at the dark curtain of night scattered with twinkling stars. Most of the dead had gone back to their resting places, along with the statues that had come to life when Lucinda laid siege to the Deadwoods. Even the stone dragon was now back in its place, and Jacob was resting in his crypt. They were all exhausted, and the Deadwoods were quiet once more, thanks to Hades. The queens almost missed having him there, and they wondered if he would visit them again. It seemed the chaos had finally ended for the ladies of the Deadwood. Hades had taken Lucinda, Ruby, and Martha with him to the underworld and banished the Wraith Queens, who would never haunt their kingdom again. And it seemed to Circe, Primrose, and Hazel that they were truly free to make the Deadwoods as they wanted, effecting real change in the many kingdoms. From this point, they would be writing the book of fairy tales, and they would make up for what the previous queens and Odd Sisters had done during their reigns of terror. They made their way back inside the mansion, inspecting every room to make sure they had repaired all the damage, until finally they reached the solarium where tea and cookies were waiting for them. They sat and drank their tea, chatting about what had happened, each of them feeling like everything was different now. They knew the Odd Sisters would never return, at least not in madness or in terror. Looks like Hades forgot his teacup. I bet it's because he wants an excuse to come back, said Primrose, laughing. Even though she was as tired as her sister and Circe, she knew sleep wouldn't come for her this evening. Too much had happened, and there was so much she was looking forward to. I'm sure the teacup was the last thing Hades was thinking about, Prim. He had his hands full with the Odd Sisters and everything else that was going on, said Hazel, shaking her head at her sister. Primrose knew her sister was just tired. They had been through so much in the past several weeks, but even if Hazel and Cersei didn't see it now, Primrose knew they had more adventures ahead of them. But she would wait until morning to share that with them. I know that. I'm just saying I hope he wants to come back, she said, taking a sip of her tea and then continuing. But you know what I don't understand? What does all this mean for James's story? What do you think? What do you know? How do you know what happened in James's story? When did you have time to read it? I thought we decided we weren't going to read stories that hadn't happened yet, asked Hazel, putting her cup down with a clack. Don't get all weird, Hazel. I didn't read it. I didn't have to. I just know it. I know almost all of the stories that haven't happened yet. How? Asked Hazel. It was something I overheard when Hades was thinking about us. It was something about how I am the one who looks to the future, you are the one who preserves the past, and Cersei is the one who keeps herself rooted in the present. Of course, the way he thought it was a lot more flowery and dramatic, but you get the idea. That still doesn't explain how you know all the stories that haven't happened yet, said Hazel, turning her teacup around in her saucer over and eyeing her sister. Don't you see? If we split time between the three of us, it will never be a burden. And once Hades put the idea in my head, all I had to do was decide that that's the role I wanted. And all the stories just came flooding in. And what does that have to do with James? Asked Cersei, who had been listening quietly until then. In James's story, Lucinda is in the place between, and Ruby and Martha are still inside her. But that story hasn't happened yet. What's even weirder is that you referenced the breaking of the worlds, but it seems like something we had to fix, not Hades. What does that mean? I think it means Hades changed fate. Perhaps we do have the power to change our fates, if only a little. And thank the gods, because I couldn't think of a happier ending for Hades and my mother's, said Cersei, smiling at Primrose and Hazel. Do you realize what's happened? We actually changed events in the book of fairy tales. That's incredible, said Primrose. She was happier than she'd ever been, and she wondered if it would be possible to change the fates of others. Only time would tell. Just then, a raven flew through an open window with a scroll tied to her little foot. The bird perched on the table near the window, eyeing the plate of cherry and almond cookies sitting there among the tea things. She hopped impatiently and then held out her little foot for one of them to take the scroll. Oh, it must be from Snow, said Primrose, taking the note from the raven. Thank you, she said to the bird, patting her on the head and giving her a cookie after she let out a soft caw. The raven ate the cookie and flew out the window, calling to the ravens and crows perched in the trees in the courtyard. What does it say? Asked Cersei. Primrose looked pale and frightened. Snow White needs our help. Something is wrong with Grimhilda's mirror. She needs us to come right away. And in that moment, Primrose, Cersei, and Hazel knew they were truly the new trio of witches in this land. They would be a new sort of odd sisters. They would be the ladies of light, just as Hades had said. The end.